Rene Descartes is often called the founder of modern philosophy. And if there's one thing that most people know about modern philosophy, it's that modern philosophy is secular. Modern philosophy does not believe that God exists. So people might be surprised to learn that Descartes himself actually was not secular. He was a practicing Catholic, and he did believe that God exists. And more than that, he thought the existence of God could be demonstrated through reason alone, through rational argumentation. So in this video, I am going to be explaining the argument that Descartes gave to demonstrate the existence of God, the argument from the infinite. Now, Descartes' proof for God emerged as part of a larger discussion about the nature of knowledge and how we can know that our knowledge is reliable. Descartes starts his philosophy by presupposing a really high standard of knowledge, which identified knowledge with certainty. A claim, Descartes argued, is only known to be true if the opposite of that claim is known with 100% certainty to be false. Basically, if the opposite of the claim is a logical absurdity, like a square circle or a married bachelor. In order to say that we know that 2 plus 2 equals 4 is true, for example, 2 plus 2 equals 5 would have to be totally absurd. And it is. So we do know that 2 plus 2 equals 4. Descartes says that all of our knowledge needs that level of certainty. In order to know something's true, you have to be absolutely certain it's true. The interesting thing about this theory of knowledge is that it allows everything to be subject to doubt. If knowledge means certainty, then we don't really have knowledge about a lot of things, because we don't really have certainty, and definitely not 100% certainty about a lot of things. So we can doubt, says Descartes, pretty much everything we think we have knowledge of. And in fact, we probably should doubt these things, from the existence of God to the existence of ourselves, to even the existence of the external world outside of ourselves. And that's where Descartes starts his philosophy, universal doubt of everything we think we have knowledge of. Now, I personally don't think that's a good way to start doing philosophy. You can see my video on how skepticism ruined modern philosophy if you want more on that. But it can be a good thought experiment to doubt everything. And Descartes tried to use this experiment of doubting everything to show that we can have certainty that we in the world outside ourselves exists. Here's how. Descartes claims that even if he doubted everything that he could not be certain about, he would still have to say that he exists. After all, if he didn't exist, who's doing the doubting? Descartes has direct access to his thoughts, and he knows that they at least exist, and in Descartes' mind, his thoughts are the same thing as himself, so if his thoughts exist, he exists. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. So Descartes knows he exists. Great. Problem is, so far, that's all he knows. He hasn't proven that there is a world outside of himself or other human beings. He knows his 5 senses are telling him these things exist, but he doesn't know if he can trust his senses yet. And that is where God comes in. Remember, all Descartes knows right now is that he exists, and his ideas exist as part of him. Honestly, it's a bit more accurate with Descartes' philosophy to say that his ideas exist as him, but that's besides the point. However his ideas exist, Descartes knows they're real. And looking at his ideas, Descartes finds one that sticks out as different from every other idea he has. The idea of the infinite. All of Descartes' ideas, he realizes, are finite. They describe something limited, either in size or in being a particular kind of thing, or having a particular shape or color or smell or quantity or any number of things. There's only one exception to that. The idea of the infinite is, by definition, an idea of something that's not finite. It's infinite. Now, Descartes knows that there must be a cause for all of his ideas having existence inside of him. There must be a reason to explain why they exist. Now, for most of his ideas, he has no problem saying that he is the cause of his ideas. He creates the ideas inside of him with his mind. The problem is with this idea of the infinite. After all, Descartes knows that his mind is finite. And as a math guy, Descartes is aware that a finite thing cannot create an infinite. How then could a finite mind possibly create an infinite idea? Indeed, it seems like the only kind of mind that could create the idea of the infinite is an infinite mind. Hence Descartes' conclusion that there must exist an infinite mind which directly implants the idea of the infinite right inside his mind, thereby causing his idea of the infinite to exist. Cool stuff, right? After all, when you start thinking about what the idea of an actual infinite mind would entail, you start realizing that this thing must be pretty different from anything else that we know about, which I guess for Descartes is still just himself and his ideas, but also, again, besides the point. To be truly infinite, a thing must have all perfections perfectly. And since goodness, knowledge, and power are all perfections, then this infinite thing must be all good, all knowing, and all powerful. It also can't lack anything at all, because then it would have a limit to it, and it can't be limited because it's infinite. So this thing must not be able to change, since you have to gain something that you lacked or start to lack something that you had before in order to change. And since this infinite mind is unable to change, it also must be outside of time, since time is a measure of change, and also outside of matter, immaterial, because matter is intrinsically changing. It's always changing in these tiny microscopic ways. Change is just built into what matter is. So there must be, according to everything Descartes has said so far, an all-good, all-powerful, all-knowing, changeless, timeless, immaterial, infinite mind responsible for putting the idea of the infinite in Descartes' head. And this thing all men call God. And this conclusion is pretty important for Descartes because it gives him a way to escape the conclusion that only he and his ideas exist. Now he, his ideas, and God exists. That's three things. So that's pretty cool. But more than that, if God exists and he's all good, we can trust our senses. After all, sense experience is a constant part of our lives. Everything we do revolves around it. If our senses were deceiving us about everything, then our whole lives would be lies. And that, Descartes argues, is just not something an all-good God would allow to happen. Maybe God will allow us to be deceived about little things here and there to keep us on our toes, but he wouldn't allow us to be deceived about literally everything we do in life. So because we can trust God not to deceive us, we can trust our senses. And because we can trust our senses, we can have knowledge of the existence of the outside material world. Neat. Now, some of you might be thinking that Descartes' argument reminds you a lot of another famous argument for God, the ontological argument. And the ontological argument does look a little bit like Descartes' argument on the surface. It starts with the idea of God as infinite and uses that to show that God exists. The difference is in the method of the two arguments. While Descartes' argument argues that God must exist in order for there to be a cause of God as actually infinite substance in our minds, the ontological argument doesn't do the same kind of cause and effect reasoning. Instead, it proposes that God's existence is directly available to us when we analyze the very definition of God and see what it entails. It's arguing that God is, in a sense, self-evident. It's just a different kind of reasoning than Descartes' argument. That being said, I do happen to think that an objection that's often raised to the ontological argument is potentially pertinent to Descartes' argument as well. In the 13th century, St. Thomas Aquinas rejected the ontological argument because he didn't think that we could ever fully grasp the nature of God in this life. We can get inklings and hints here and there of what God's nature is like, but only in the next life will we ever be able to have a complete definition of God, because God is so far beyond our human capacity to grasp. Because of this, Aquinas argued that the very first premise of the ontological argument gets off on the wrong foot. Without a complete grasp of the nature of God, we can't use his definition to prove he exists, because we don't fully know his definition. In the same way, someone could object to Descartes' argument by pointing out that we don't really have a full grasp of the idea of the infinite. We can kind of think about what the infinite might be like by imagining bigger and bigger and bigger things, but our minds can never fully wrap our heads and completely comprehend the concept of infinity. So it's a little tenuous to say that we can know that there must be an infinite being in order to explain our idea of the infinite when we're really not even sure if we have an idea of the infinite. So personally, I'll just let the cat out of the bag a bit here. I happen to not be that convinced by Descartes' argument. Maybe you are, and that's fine. But from my perspective, the failure of Descartes to prove that God exists leaves him with two options. Either he abandons his idea that knowledge requires absolute certainty, or he is left in skepticism and unable to say that even the world outside of his mind exists. And since I'm not willing to accept any philosophy that can't defend the clear and obvious truth that the world outside of us exists, I'm going to look for my epistemological starting point in something other than absolute certainty. And the moment you do that, you open the door to much better arguments for God, including ones that I've covered in previous videos. And if you want to see those videos, please consider checking out the rest of my channel, and consider subscribing to stay informed as I come out with more content, and also to help me reach more people. Thank you for watching, and God bless.